MMOs are defined by content updates. It's a never-ending treadmill of gearing up and finishing a raid, and re-gearing up, finishing the next raid, and rinse and repeat. It's like real life, but instead you get purples instead of depression. Classic is wholly unique in the fact that it has a planned end, and even before its release, the big question has always been, what happens after Naxxramas? As of this video, the game is coasting along smoothly through the second to last raid tier on Crusade, with most US servers holding a medium, high, or full population. In fact, the game has been doing very well, even exceeding Blizzard's expectations, as they had to increase the amount of servers on launch from 13 to over 40, because people were getting queue times like this. The goalpost from Classic's failure has been moved from it'll never launch because people don't actually want it,
to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
To it'll last a week or two before the rose-colored goggles lose their touch. Or after people hit 60 they'll quit. Or, well, give it a month. Give it 3 months. Give it 5 months. Give it 1 year. It's like those crazy people who predict that the world is going to end every single day. Or it's going to rain today, and it doesn't rain. Well, it's going to rain today, and it doesn't rain. Repeat that for about 3 months, and bam. You see? I told you it was going to rain today. You idiots didn't believe me. The only difference is they're less annoying because when it turns out they're wrong, they just disappear. That's an internet classic right there. Argue up and down for years that you're right and everyone else is a moron. And when it looks like that's not the case, they don't say, oh damn, I was wrong. Instead, they just delete their account or never return. Trust me, I fought these people for years leading up to the release of the game. Paragraphs upon pages upon books, and people trying to convince me and others that we don't actually like something. And now they're mysteriously absent. Whoops. But let's get back on subject. It's certainly something that we've had little experience with. In fact, the only game that I know off the top of my head that tried something similar is RuneScape. MMOs have come and gone, of course, but none saw their demise with intention. It's like, okay guys, we got the IP for Warhammer, a legend in its own right in the world of fantasy. Orcs, elves, undead, and magic. You know, there's another MMO out right now that's doing pretty well. What could possibly go wrong? Or, okay guys, we got the IP for Star Wars, a legend in its own right in the world of sci-fi. Jedi, Sith, spaceships, and siblings kissing each other. What could possibly go wrong? The death of your typical MMO has 3 routes. There's one huge sudden change in design that completely changes the focus of the game, and what made it special is cast aside for the sake of conforming to a new standard. Option B, we have a slow but steady degradation in quality or appeal, and they just can't replace subscribers as quickly as they're losing them. And alternatively, the game just never had it to begin with. It was hyped up to be this massive thing, and after the initial launch honeymoon period has worn off, people see it for what it truly is, a rushed out, broken down mess. There's a hidden, obscure 4th route here though. The developers intentionally halt content updates, even if the game is performing well. A situation that's unique to classic World of Warcraft. It's a catch-22. For the game to be successful, it must be replicated as closely as possible to its original design cycle during 04 to 07, and for that to happen, it must recreate its original end, which many people believe is where it will fail. For the game to succeed, it must end. In short, no one really knows what'll happen, not even Blizzard, I'm sure. Will the players be content for the first time in history with an MMO that doesn't release new content? Or will the player base dwindle? How many alts can players make and re-gear them up in the endgame rating? Or maybe PvP is their choice? Whereas in raiding, there's that drop-off in an already pretty trivial difficulty as people gear up, but PvP will always provide that challenge. The most difficult hurdle, I think, though, is the community. With Classic being so dependent and intertwined with that community, there's a lot at stake. There are a lot of people who play not really for the game itself, but rather for the people they're playing with. I think a lot of people say the same for current, but I wager it's more intense with Classic since it's so community-oriented. It's the domino effect that I've seen kill many guilds throughout the game's lifespan. One guy quits, and 2 of his friends quit, then 2 each of their friends. Oh, there goes the officer. and then the GM because he can't run it all by himself. In the right environment, this can happen in the span of a week. There will always be a zealot-like following who will play the game no matter what, but how big is that following is the question. Will it be enough to keep the game alive? I can't answer that, but I can guess. First, let's clarify the question and assume that we're not getting Classic Plus or Fresh servers. I personally think that it's a 100% chance that we're getting Fresh servers at the very least, but for the sake of argument, let's just assume the worst case scenario. Naxxramas comes out, and then we get nothing. The real question though is, when do you consider a game to be dead? If all the servers shut down, or maybe there's just a few running, how many? By now, it's about a 99.9% chance that the Burning Crusade is coming out. I don't think that Classic would ever die unless Blizzard liquidates, but I do foresee that the player base will take a substantial hit when BC releases. Current and Classic, although they share the same name, are MMOs of two different breeds. If you feel like having more than 4 stats, you play Classic. If you feel like doing a dungeon without globetrotting for 20 minutes, you play Current. If you want the Fisher-Price version of raiding, you play Classic. And if you want to pay for progression, you play Current. They attract two different types of players, and a simple fact of the matter is when the Burning Crusade comes out, it'll attract the Classic crowd, and simply put, it'll be a game with quote fresh content versus a game that's stagnating. Ask anyone who enjoys playing Classic if they think that the Burning Crusade is a good expansion. You'll be very hard-pressed, I think, to find someone who says no, because it's pretty much Classic, but with more balance, more dungeons, raids, and more everything really. You can bring a tank who's not a warrior, and priests aren't the best healers by far, Fury Warriors don't dominate the DPS meters, and PvP, while it still has burst, it is not the same level of Classic with the advent of the resilience stat. In my opinion, it's that sweet spot middle ground where there's more balance, but the things that make these classes unique aren't sacrificed. Everyone is closer to each other, but they still have their own charms and quirks that people come to love with Vanilla Classic. The world buff meta doesn't serve as a game genie code to breeze through these raids, because Blizzard had cut on to what was happening at that point. It has a PvP system that doesn't require 16 hours a day, 7 days a week to make it to the top, and so on and so forth. But most important of all, at its release, it's not stagnant. I personally think that there will always be Classic servers, and no matter what, it's done well. I'm not saying it won't be more, but getting at least nearly a year and a half of booming success out of a 15-year-old game is a huge accomplishment no matter what. What game have you played recently that kept your attention for a year and a half? And again, this is all assuming no Classic Plus nor Fresh servers. If they do that, all bets are off. In regards to Fresh servers, the advent of private servers proves this, as they've been in perpetual restarts for the past decade, and people still play them. That's where the longevity and replayability will be for Classic. You simply replay it over and over, every year and a half or so, or 2 years, starting from scratch with everyone else. Some people ask, well, doesn't that get boring, just doing the same thing over and over again? Well, sex is the same thing over and over, and I don't know, does that get boring? And yes, that just happened. I actually compared Classic World of Warcraft to sex. But I also think that in general, the player base will be pretty heavily split between Classic and BC, and the overall health of Classic Vanilla will suffer when BC releases because they're just so similar. I'm not trying to be an alarmist here, just realistic. My official prediction is that when BC launches, you will see a hit to the Classic community, and possibly a reduction in servers, but an always thriving scene if they go down that fresh server launch at the end of each Naxxramas cycle, or maybe even Classic Plus, because I don't think that's fully off the table as of yet. Ultimately though, it is just conjecture. I think no matter what, the developers and community as a whole should be proud of what they've done, both old and new. It hasn't been perfect. Botting and the trivial difficulty in raiding have certainly been blemishes on its run, but for me personally, it's been a fun ride. I made a lot of friends, and thoroughly enjoyed myself for the past year, and already have a lot of good memories. I wonder how many of them would have thought that the game they were making 15 years ago would still be relevant today. They made something that truly is timeless, and brought many people together. After years and years of you think you do's but you don'ts, and it'll never happens, and the walls of no, a small group of developers and a dedicated community said screw that crap, give the people what they want. There's just something about the community that makes it a more enjoyable experience for everyone. One of the biggest differences with Current and Classic, I think, is that it's game-driven content versus player-driven content. One of Classic's biggest weaknesses is actually its biggest strength, and that's the endgame is so basic that players have time to do what they want to do. You aren't led around on a leash through the form of 200 daily and weekly chores, and one of the big reasons is why you see all of these independent PvP tournaments and events is because A, the game is community driven, and B, you just have more time for it. When your content is player driven, it'll be relevant as long as there are players, no matter how many quirks there are that many would deem to be objective flaws. The bottom line is that no one can say for sure what'll happen, but the one thing I'm confident about is that the 1.5 years of great success and the friendships forged over that time is more than worth it. And here's hoping for many more. Oh, and by the way, I told you it was gonna rain. No one believed me.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.